When you think of Georgia politics these days, what comes to mind? I bet it's a state right on a knife's edge, right? Swinging like crazy in every big election. It's become one of the most watched political battlegrounds in the whole country. But is that really the whole story? Okay, let's dive into this.
So here's the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer. Is Georgia just a temporary swing state, bouncing back and forth? Or are we actually watching a much deeper, more permanent political transformation unfold right before our eyes?
All right, first up, let's talk about the image of Georgia we all see in the headlines. This really fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of confusing political puzzle.
And look, it's true. If you're only paying attention to the huge national races, for president, for the Senate, it totally looks like a pendulum. Swings blue, then swings red, then back to blue again. That chaos is what makes the news, and it makes the state feel completely unpredictable. But what if the real story, the one that actually matters for the long run, is happening somewhere else entirely?
And that brings us to our second point, what we're calling the slow blue wave. This is where we peel back that noisy top layer of national politics and look at a much quieter, but maybe far more important trend that's been building at the state level.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. I mean, go back just one decade to 2014. The Democratic Party in Georgia state legislature was at an absolute low point. Republicans had a supermajority. But then look what happens. Starting in 2016, this slow, steady climb begins, and it just hasn't stopped. We're not talking about a sudden swing, we're talking about a decade-long story of gradual, consistent change.
And this, right here, this is the core argument. On one side, you've got the national elections, which act like that pendulum we talked about, swinging with the mood of the country. But on the other side, the state legislature, well, that looks a lot more like a rising tide. It's slow, it's steady, and it's moving in one direction. And that suggests something much deeper is going on here than just who's on the ballot.
And honestly, the data here makes this trend just undeniable. Take a look at that bar for 2014. That's a huge Republican majority margin. Now, just watch what happens as you go from 2018 to 2022. You can literally see that advantage shrinking election after election. This isn't a swing, it's a steady erosion. The big question, of course, is why? Why is this happening?
Well, that's the perfect lead-in to our third section, demographics versus strategy. Let's dig into the real forces that are driving this incredible shift.
Okay, so to really get the significance of this, we need a little historical context. For a long time, the Southern strategy was a major political playbook in the region. Now, the source material we're looking at argues that what's happening in Georgia today suggests this decades-old strategy is just losing its power there.
So if that old playbook is fading, what's taking its place? Well, it all comes down to one word: demographics. The engine of this change is the absolutely explosive growth happening around Atlanta and other cities like Athens, Savannah, and Augusta. Georgia is seeing this constant influx of younger, highly educated people moving in, and that is fundamentally reshaping the state's political DNA from the ground up.
An insight from the source analysis really puts a fine point on this. It says the leadership of figures like Stacey Abrams acted as a booster, for sure. But the analysis argues that the real sustainable force, the tailwind pushing everything forward, is the unstoppable demographic growth in these urban and suburban areas.
So, if this is the story in Georgia, what does it mean for the bigger picture? That takes us to our final section. Are we looking at a new Southern future?
And what makes this all so compelling is that Georgia isn't an island here. If you look over at North Carolina, you see a very similar pattern taking shape. That same urban growth, that same demographic change, all driving a gradual political shift. It really suggests we might be looking at a regional phenomenon, not just a one-off case.
And so we end on this thought. If the steady, undeniable math of demographics is truly the key driver here, more powerful than the loud, chaotic swings of national politics, then what does that tell us about the future of Georgia and maybe the future of the American South? It suggests we're heading towards a future that could look very, very different from its past.